Okay, so I want you to just picture this.
Hmm.
Imagine a crowded house in Capernaum. It's a bustling port town on the Sea of Galilee. It's the first century. And the air is just thick,
Mm-hmm.
not just with, dust and the smell of fish, but with this suffocating grief.
And that grief, it belongs to a man named Jairus. He's a respected synagogue ruler, a man with real status. But none of that matters.
No.
Because in that moment, he's powerless. He's
Yeah.
just lost his 12-year-old daughter, and that kind of tragedy, especially a child's death, was, well, it was horribly common. But for Jairus, it was the end of his world.
Right. And then you have this pivotal moment. Yeshua arrives, and he cuts through all the noise,
Yeah.
all the ritualized despair, and he utters two simple words in Aramaic.
TALITHA KUM.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those words just fundamentally defy the entire era.
And that right there is our mission for this deep dive. We really need to get into the context here. We have to understand the raw, brutal reality of life and death back then.
Because only then can we really appreciate it.
Exactly. Only then do you see why this simple, intimate command, Talitha Kum, was so incredibly revolutionary. It's all about the contrast. The contrast between this world, saturated in complicated mourning, and one single direct instruction.
Okay, so let's unpack that brutal context first. We have to get our heads around just how fragile life was.
It's hard to overstate. If you were a typical person in first century Palestine, rich or poor, it didn't matter. Your average life expectancy,
Yeah.
it barely hit 35.
35 years.
Yeah.
Just think about that for a second. Most of us today expect to live more than twice that long.
And the culprits were relentless. We're talking malaria, dysentery, constant infections. There weren't any medical treatments to speak of. These illnesses were just a fact of daily life, and they took young lives without mercy.
And if we zoom in on the rural Galilean peasants, which was the vast majority of the population, the child mortality rate is just devastating.
Oh, it's crushing. The sources suggest that a typical mother, let's just, call her Miriam, living in a little village somewhere, she could expect to lose 3 out of every 5 of her children
3 out of 5.
before they even turn 10.
Wow. And why? What was the main cause?
It often came down to something as basic as contaminated water. The lack of sanitation, it meant that a simple drink of water could easily be a death sentence.
So death wasn't this formal, distant event. It was immediate, it was personal, it was happening right outside your door.
Exactly. And peasant families, they didn't have the money or time for these elaborate ceremonies or fancy rock-hewn tombs.
We couldn't.
Absolutely not. Necessity dictated everything. They had to bury their loved ones, especially their children, in shallow graves, often right next to their home.
And quickly.
Very quickly. With hasty, minimal rituals, it was a race against decomposition in that searing Galilean heat. Survival was the only thing that mattered.
Which, that brings us to the customs that this survival-focused life created. These are people who are living on barley bread, figs, olives. Life is just constant hard work. How did that shape family life?
It shaped everything. Take marriage customs, which can seem really jarring to us now. Arranged marriages for girls. They often happened right around puberty, 12, 13 years old.
Which sounds so young to us.
It is. But it wasn't really a romantic decision. It was driven by sheer necessity. You needed to forge strong family alliances, and quickly. It was about social security, about preserving your lineage when life was so short and Roman rule was so oppressive.
And that pressure, that survival instinct, it seems like it even bled into their religious practices. You mentioned sources suggest a sort of a blending of faiths. What did that look like?
It meant that, ancient traditions sometimes hung on, even for people deeply committed to Judaism. Peasants might blend their Jewish beliefs with older, lingering Canaanite traditions.
For instance?
Well, we find evidence of things like animal offerings, maybe sacrificing a goat at a local altar, not just for atonement, but to ensure a good harvest or healthy children. It's a very practical, transactional relationship with the divine. It's all about fertility and survival.
And this context is so important for understanding Yeshua's message later on. When he talks about agape, this idea of pure, unconditional love, what is he challenging?
He's challenging that entire transactional system. In the Greek of the time, people understood eros, passionate love, and they understood philos, which is brotherly love, family love, the kind of love that drove those alliances.
Right.
Agape was totally different. It transcended both. It was a call to a love that's given with no expectation of getting something back, a love completely divorced from the need for good harvests or strong alliances.
It was revolutionary.
It was, because it basically said, God's love isn't dependent on the goats you sacrifice or the deals you make.
That clarifies so much about the pressures on the poorest. But let's pivot now. Let's look at the other side of the coin. The world of Jairus, the elite, the synagogue rulers, the Herodians. What was life like for them?
A completely different universe. For the elite, family life was, it was absolutely a political chess game. Marrying your 12-year-old daughter to a much older, powerful man.
Yeah.
That wasn't just about survival. It was about consolidating power.
Cementing alliances.
Exactly. Preserving lineage and wealth. That was everything, especially when your own life could be cut short at any moment.
And unlike the peasants, the elites were really influenced by the conquering Roman culture, weren't they? We're talking about some pretty bizarre practices seeping in.
Yes, very much so. We know from historians of the time, like Tacitus, that Roman elites practiced strange divination rituals. For example, inspecting the entrails of a pigeon to foretell a death or predict if a healing would be successful.
And this kind of thing would have fascinated some of the Jewish elites.
It did, though. It clashed deeply with traditional Jewish sobriety. It shows you the pull of the dominant culture.
So while most Jews were focused on the Torah, you have these wealthy circles engaging in practices that sound almost decadent, like those banquets.
Precisely. We see hints of these elite curiosities, lavish banquets, where the wine might be laced with hallucinogenic herbs to try and induce spiritual visions. Now, that was not standard Jewish practice at all.
Of course not.
But it shows how Roman culture could tempt the wealthy away from those strict ethical norms and toward more dramatic, almost pagan forms of spiritual exploration.
So when death did finally arrive in one of these elite homes, the morning was anything but quiet and hasty.
No, it was a full-scale public production. It had to be. Contemporary historians like Josephus give us incredible detail on the elaborate, almost mandatory mourning rites.
What are we talking about here?
We're talking professional wailers hired to cry and scream for days, people tearing their clothes, throwing ashes on their heads. It was a loud, public, theatrical performance of grief. It was a show of respect that matched the family's status.
And the burial itself reflected that status, too. No shallow graves by the house.
Not at all. They used sophisticated rock-hewn family tombs. The bodies were carefully washed, anointed with expensive oils, and wrapped in fine linen shrouds. But even that wasn't the end.
Right, because later on they'd collect the bones.
Exactly. After the body had decomposed, they'd gather the bones and place them in these ornate stone boxes called ossuaries.
And those ossuaries are a tangible link for us today, right? Archaeologists have actually found these.
They have. It's a concrete archaeological find. The Jericho excavations in the 1960s, for example, uncovered these. It confirms the practice was widespread among the Jewish elites. It shows a real commitment to the deceased that went far beyond the initial burial.
So if we pull this all together for you, the listener, you have this world of extremes. You have peasant families burying their dead quietly and quickly just to survive. And then you have the elite engaging in days of theatrical, Roman-influenced mourning with these elaborate tombs.
That is the intensely ritualistic, death-saturated world that Yeshua walks into in Capernaum.
And this is where that stunning contrast just hits you. Yeshua enters Jairus' home, and the mourning is already in full swing. The professional wailers are there. The flute players are piping these sad dirges.
It was an urban custom, a paid service to amplify the grief.
Which we know from historical records, right? Like papyri that show contracts for this kind of thing.
That's right. So the room is filled with professionals who are being paid to manufacture extreme sadness.
And then what does he do?
Well, the gospel account immediately highlights how audacious his actions are. He clears the room. He tells them all to get out. He insists the girl isn't dead. She's just sleeping.
And that gets a laugh. Literally. The crowd mocks him.
They do. They laugh at him because she was obviously dead and everybody in that room knew it.
But that detail,
Yeah.
that laughter, that's important, isn't it?
It's seen by many historians as a hallmark of authenticity. If you were just inventing a perfect miracle story, why would you include the embarrassing detail that the crowd laughed at your hero right before he performs the miracle? It adds this layer of raw human reality to the account.
So he clears the room. And then comes the act itself, the absolute simplicity of it.
He takes the girl by the hand and says just 2 words, TALITHA KUM.
And the language here is so key. He's not speaking in the formal, sacred Hebrew of the temple.
No. And he's not using Koine Greek, the language of commerce, and later the New Testament writers. He speaks Aramaic, his everyday language, the language of home.
Let's break those 2 words down because they're so incredibly tender. Talitha doesn't just mean girl.
No, it's an intimate term. It translates literally as little girl, but the feel of it is much more like calling her little lamb or sweetheart. It's deeply affectionate.
And kum.
Is simply arise or get up.
So it's essentially this gentle, intimate command, sweetheart, wake up, which stands in such radical opposition to every other healing method of the time.
Completely. Think about what was common. Healing practices back then often involved these long, complicated invocations to different gods, mixing herbs, carrying protective talismans, using special prayer scrolls.
Like the ones used by the Essenes.
Exactly. Yeshua bypasses all of that, all the magic, all the ritual. It was just a straightforward personal command.
Which raises the question, why Aramaic? For a moment that is so profoundly divine, why use the language of the home?
Because it reveals a divine intimacy. It's the same intimacy we see when he uses the Aramaic word Abba for God instead of the formal Hebrew Ev.
Right. Abba's more like dear father.
Or even daddy. That level of direct, informal address for God was so shocking, so revolutionary, it often scandalized the religious establishment. It just shattered the distance between the human and the divine.
And that emotional directness, it's like a linguistic fingerprint we see throughout his life. We have strong evidence that Aramaic was what he used in his most personal and guarded moments.
We do. When the Gospels were later translated into Greek, the scribes often kept certain Aramaic phrases because they were just too powerful to translate. The most famous example, of course, is his cry from the cross, which we find preserved in manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus.
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
A moment of complete despair delivered in his native tongue.
And it wasn't just then. He used Ephatha, be opened, to heal a deaf man. Again, it's that direct emotional power of Aramaic.
And that linguistic legacy didn't stop with him. The early church, even though they spoke mostly Greek, they held on to certain Aramaic phrases like Marana, that powerful cry, come Lord. It even filtered down into common culture. The word abracadabra, which we think of as stage magic.
Yeah.
It comes from the Aramaic abracadabra. I create as I speak.
That's incredible, how two little words from a local language could have such massive resonance. But let's move beyond the words themselves. Let's talk about the physical evidence that grounds this story in reality.
Right, because we don't have to rely only on linguistics. We have significant archaeological corroboration.
From Capernaum itself.
Yes. Excavations there have uncovered first-century homes with basalt floors and adobe walls that match the gospel descriptions perfectly. We can literally walk on the black basalt foundations of the synagogue where he taught. We can see the remains of what many scholars believe was Peter's house.
And what about the burial customs of the elite we talked about?
Also confirmed. The discovery of the ossuaries belonging to the family of Caiaphas, the high priest, in the 1990s, that verifies biblical names, settings. It ties the world of the Gospels directly to the physical land.
So this isn't some story just floating in the ether. It's anchored in the real, daily life of first-century Galilee.
It is, and that's why, even among scholars who are known for their skepticism, there's a consensus on the core historical fact that Yeshua was known as a healer.
You mean historians who doubt the supernatural parts still accept that?
Exactly. Sources that are independent of the Gospels, like the Roman governor Pliny the Younger or the Jewish historian Josephus, who calls him a doer of paradoxical deeds, they all consistently show that he was seen as a healer and a miracle worker by the people of his time. That historical element is not easily dismissed.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to Jairus' daughter. With all this context, the high mortality, the political pressures, the dramatic rituals, what does it tell us about the miracle itself?
It tells us the miracle wasn't just that life was restored. It was the radical, humanizing detail that came right after.
Then the food.
The food. Once she was awake, he didn't just leave. He instructed her parents to give her something to eat.
It seems so mundane, but it's so profound. Why is that one instruction, give her some food, so important?
Because in a society where a 12-year-old girl was already seen as ready for marriage, for labor, as a transactional asset, Yeshua treats her with profound gentleness.
He doesn't see her as an asset.
No. The instruction to feed her ensures the restoration is complete. She is truly alive. She's hungry. She's been returned to her childhood, not just summoned back by some ghostly magical command. He treats her as a beloved daughter, a Talitha, a little lamb who just needs to eat and grow.
That simple, direct humanity just completely transforms the entire moment. We started this deep dive in a world defined by ritual, by oppression, by the constant fear of a quick, anonymous death. And we finished by seeing how two simple, everyday Aramaic words, TALITHA KUM, through all of that historical weight, they deliver this moment of profound, simple hope.
And that choice of language, that intimate choice, stands in such stark contrast to the power structures of the day. They lived under the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But that peace was enforced by terror. It was often punctuated by the Latin cry of crucifix.
Crucify him, a language of violence and empire.
Yes. And against that immense political and military power, Talitha Kum embodied a quiet, almost insurgent hope. It was a command not of empire, but of home.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. How does knowing this specific context, the history, the linguistics, the fact that he deliberately chose the language of intimacy and the hearth, not the formal language of the temple or the conquering empire, how does that change your perception of this simple, direct command today? That intimacy, that directness, that's something worth mulling over.